All right, welcome to the talk. Go ahead and give it up for Wayne. Throw some emojis out there.
All right, everyone can hear me fine, yeah? Awesome. My name's Wayne. I'm from Australia, and for the last 10 years I've been doing adversarial simulation, so I guess you'd probably put that in the same sphere as red teaming. And I started running the red teams.net blog last year, so it's been fun. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about my journey of making my own C2 and implant infrastructure. I will give one warning though, I do have some slides in here from the Vault 7 leak, so if you have clearance and you're not allowed to look at those, I can tell you when to close your eyes. But yeah, thanks for being here, and this conference is super fun. So here we go. So when the Vault 7 leaks came out, I read this. It said Assassin is an automated implant that provides a simple collection platform on remote computers running the Microsoft Windows operating system. And I thought to myself, this is pretty stock standard to all the other C2 or implants that I've used over the time. But I always had this urge to want to build my own. And to be honest, I just kept putting it off and off and off because I knew that it would probably engross me for a long time. And I was trying to probably do some other different things. But it kind of came about, and I kind of got really deep into the Vault 7 leaks. Actually took all 8,000 papers and went through them and started to build a framework of how they build their own C2 and implant infrastructures. And I guess the question is, why would I want to build a new one? We've got super awesome ones like Cobalt Strike and Canvas and Metasploit, Core Impact. But what I really wanted to do is I really wanted to simulate a real true adversary. I wanted to give the people that I tested something they hadn't seen before. I wanted their SOCs to be able to try and determine if the traffic they were seeing was legitimate traffic or it was malicious traffic, not by looking at something that is not going to be picked up by a signature. My work, the jobs that I do usually go for about 4 to 6 months, and we have like high value targets, and I wanted to be able to put something custom on those machines or those devices in relation to digital espionage, so I could gather a whole bunch of business intelligence over a long period of time. So to try and do that, I thought I would probably make my own long-term implant to target those HVTs. And the other thing is that this was my digital Everest. So not being a coder or a developer, having a background, this was kind of my Everest. My command and control wish list, I started to write down what I wanted, and I wanted to have easy access. I wanted it to be a quick setup, and I wanted to have secure communication. And I'd been at RSA for a couple of years, and all these dashboards were coming out, so I thought I better make sure it's got a dashboard. Want it to be easy to operate, and I want it to be task driven, so I can just issue tasks and I can just go about doing those. Obviously, I want to store all that stuff into a database, and I want to make it scalable if I have to. My implant wish list, so I want to make sure I can have DLs or executables. I want to be able to make it task execution. I wanted to run in userland, so I don't want to have to run it as admin or as system or as root. I want it to be able to run in userland. So all the tasks that I give it, I want it to be able to do those as a user. I want it to be able to capture audio and screen capture. I want to make sure the keylogger does what it needs to be able to do. And I may have a need for it to be memory based. And obviously I want the implant or the beacon to have secure communication. And how do I do that? So I was sitting at a conference in Australia on the 15th of October 2017, and this was day one when I made the decision that I was going to 110% into this and make it. So being an artist, I drew a really good picture of what my C2 was going to look like. This. It's pretty crap. But it's really interesting because I really never keep anything like this when I draw it. And for some reason I kept this. And even though it's horrible writing, and no, I'm not a doctor, but the structure of it is actually quite interesting because that's somewhat very close to the structure that I was trying to develop. And I kept this, and it's on my wall in my office to remind me that, you know, if you work really, really hard, you know, you can definitely achieve things, you know, that you've seen and you've kind of dreamt about. But then we came down to, okay, what does my implant have? How do I make an implant? Well, where do I start? And as I was going through the Vault 7 leaks, I kept breaking down what codes what code language they would use. You know, how are they communicating from the client to the server to the client? And a lot of the times, a lot of things came up. So RESTful API came up, and Python was used quite a bit. But one thing kept creeping up all the time was C and C++, something that they use quite a lot. And then they talked about, obviously, those RESTful APIs being able to make post requests, get requests. And there was also big conversations and talking about, you know, when does your implant beacon home? You know, what are the time frames and how does it do that? And then obviously, what encryption do you use? And so I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is quite a lot of work just for an implant. And I'm not a C++ coder. I do code in Python, but not in C++. Never. So then I was looking around and I found this GitHub C++ REST SDK, which is Microsoft's C++ framework for cloud-based client-server communication. It's really quite interesting. There's not a lot of people that have used this before, and Microsoft made it, and its nickname is Casablanca, which is kind of cool. So I actually, you know, got Visual Studio, and I downloaded this, and I started to play with this, and I started to have a look. Microsoft is obviously very good at documentation, not so much with this REST SDK. They provided it open source, and there's a bit of information out there about how to use it and stuff, but not a great deal. Not like if you're like writing it in .NET or something like that, you'd probably get a lot more explanation and code. So I looked at this, and this is what I decided I would stick with. I guess you'll see what happened as we go through. And then you've got the command and control development, the C2. So I made a decision from the Vault 7 leaks that I would use a Python Flask because I was very familiar with it. And Python Flask comes with its own RESTful API, which is great. I was going to run that on an Ubuntu server and with Postgres SQL database. I wanted to have a web user interface, which is quite doable using Flask. And I wanted to make sure that I could task commands through that interface for each implant that would call home or would register with the C2. And I wanted my C2 to be easy deployed, and I wanted it to be lightweight. And then my list is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and this idea of making this thing, actually it started to seem it was a lot easier for me to maybe just steal one from the CIA than start making one. But then I had to figure out what kind of tasking I was going to do. You know, was it going to be asynchronous? Well, in a way, I'd already chosen that because the SDK or the Casablanca, that's how it communicates. The user interface, I decided was going to be a web interface, and I was going to task commands. And then it's the callback period, like, you know, do you want to make it changeable? How long should it be? And that kind of relays into, you know, what operation you're on or what job you're on at the time. You know, and most of the times with C2s, with the way that we run them, is we have, you know, short callback time and really long callback time. So in case one gets burnt, we can jump across to our other one that's on the long callback time. And I wanted to have a database where I could store everything, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that it was secure, because all the information that I'm retrieving, if this works from the client or from the target, is going to be stored on the C2 server. So I needed to make sure that that was secure. And I want to be able to process tasks. But at the same time, I was thinking to myself, well, if I have 2 implants on 2 different computers, I don't want one implant to get held up because the task that's next in the queue is not for it. So it doesn't do anything. So I had to make sure in my code that I could make it go through the task lists and not bottleneck up. Sounded easy, but became quite difficult for me, to be honest. And I wanted to make sure that I could task my results, and I didn't want to have a backlog, as I just explained. And then there's the communication. So it's quite interesting, right? Like, I think to myself, I make this drawing and I look at it all, and then by the time I break it all down, I've got a huge amount of work here, and I start to really understand what, I was a pen tester for quite some time, and I start to really understand what developers actually go through. And I had some friends that were developers, and I would ring them and I would say to them, man, like, this is not easy. And they're like, no, it's not. And it's going to take you a long time, and you're going to get frustrated. And I'm like, yeah, I can see it, And then I get to the communication part, and I'm like, well, how does it fetch a task? And then, I want to go over HTTPS, and, I want to protect my API, so I've got to make sure my Java Web Token is protected, and I do the security for that correct, because there's been a lot of releases in security about Java Web Tokens. And I better make sure that I make my communication proxy auto detect as well, and I can upload and I can download and I can do all the things that a normal C2 does. And how do I integrate that? How do I do that with the communication? So I've done all this work, but I actually haven't written a single piece of code yet. I've just written everything down, all these things that I have to do. These are all the goals that I want to achieve, and I haven't even got to the start of writing any code. And then I was thinking about, my operational window, when should the implant go active? Should I have a hibernation time for it? Like, when it goes on the target, should it hibernate for a certain amount of time? Should I do something when it comes out of hibernation before going active? With the Java Web Token, do I make it so that it expires, and when the Java Web Token expires, then the implant can't talk back to the C2, which means then it's time for it to self-delete. What should the callback periods be? And what about user activity? I'm very big on, when we're on a system, trying to behave like the user. So I don't want to do anything that the user really hasn't done before. I come up against lots of ex-defense, so I come up against a lot of defense systems and a lot of different other systems that, they have their own SOC, they have their own blue team. So they're always hunting and looking for things. So I wanted to I want to blend into that user activity. And then there's the user interface. So as you can see, like, there's just so much going on here, and I haven't even got to the point yet of really designing anything yet. And then the user interface is like, well, how do I manage the implants? And then how do I generate the tasks for the implants to do the jobs? And how do I go about targeting, the high value targets? How do I register the implant into the C2? How do I list the tasks from the database? And then how do I view those results? And then how do I go back to tasking more commands? So it's becoming some sort of a massive beast now of a project. And then I was reading the Vault 7 leaks, and they talked about doing system surveys. So, when they would first install an implant or a beacon, or they would do a system survey where they would get a whole bunch of, the OS information and network information, and they would look at what recent USB devices were plugged in, and, what browsers they use, and passwords, and DNS cache, and, what recent RDP sessions, and obviously, what shares. I like how they say the PSP, actually, you know, their personal security thing, whatever it's called, but it's AV. And, you know, what persistence, you know, one thing that they spoke about a lot in the Vault 7 leaks was having persistence, because, you know, obviously if you want to sit on a machine for a long period of time, you've got to have some form of persistence. So then I got it in my head that I needed to come up with my own persistence on my target OSs, and I mainly concentrated on Windows 10 and the server ranges from 16 through to 2019. But I kind of wanted to come up with my own persistence from a low privilege user. I don't want to be having to run this at a high privilege user at any time. So I wanted to have a persistence on reboot for those high value targets. So I wanted to try and find that as well. So it's really coming massive. And then I saw this, and the reason that I started looking into the Vault 7 leaks was because, coming from a defense background, I wanted to actually see, Wikileaks had spoken quite loudly that they had, I guess, taken all the important and things out of the leaks that they thought would help anybody make any of these tools. And I kind of wanted to go through them and see if that was true. I guess you guys can make your mind up at the end, but I didn't put a lot of documents in, but I did put some in that I thought were really important. And I found this one to be incredibly important: development tradecraft do's and don'ts. And this was pages and pages long of the things that you should or shouldn't do when you're making your implant. You know, what your binary file should do and shouldn't do. And it was quite interesting, you know, like on the, you know, obfuscate, encrypt all strings. So now, I didn't have that in my list before, and now I've got to do that. Strip all debug symbols, strip all debugging output. Now, for somebody that had never coded in C++ before, this is all very new to me. Minimize my binary file size. So I've got to have it, you know, not very big. You know, so I can't cheat and write it in Python and have Python exe, because that's going to be too big. And I've got to use end-to-end encryption if I can, and try and follow the use of RFC protocols. And then there's the time zones, and use variable sizing of timing of the implant. And then on the other side over here, these are things you shouldn't do. And I found this one quite interesting: have dirty words in the binary. And I'm like, what are dirty words? And I actually didn't get that at the start, but then I realized, you know, and perform operation that will cause the target to be unresponsive. So the idea here, then I started thinking to myself, okay, well, if I actually write this and it actually works, then I've got to have a test environment for it. And then I thought to myself, oh, if I change one thing in my implant, one piece of code, then I'm going to have to do all that pre-operation testing all over again to make sure that the changes that I've made don't make any operating system unresponsive or any machine unresponsive. So I'm really starting to understand what developers go through, and it started to give me a really different view of me being a pen tester before, of how when we would have those meetings with developers and we'd talk about the things we found, it gave me a different light. I started to see things in a very different way. I can't leave any dates or times behind in the implant. And I found this one really interesting. I actually had never really thought of this before, but allowed network traffic such as the C2 packets to be replayable. And I thought, wow, geez, what a really interesting attack. You know, you intercept C2 traffic and you replay it. I had never done that before. So now I was thinking about, well, that's the last thing that I would want to happen with my own C2, but it's the last thing I would want to happen with all the other C2s that we use for the jobs that we're on. So I kind of stopped what I was doing and went and got the other C2s and saw if this was possible. And then proper cleaning up a network, you know, like being able to clean up the network connections. So being able to, you know, run your task and being able to clean up it properly so there's nothing left behind or it's not leaking memory or anything like that. And this is a really interesting one too. Don't assume that all free antivirus products are the same as the retail copy. And I can actually say that is actually incredibly true, because I bought top 5 AV products and I had the free ones as well. And I got some very different results, which I thought was really quite interesting. This here is a piece of code. It's calling WMI in Windows into the WMI database. It's calling like the operating system to get an idea of what it is. Although that code works incredibly well. There's also this code here for WMI and C++, web BEM scripting. This code example here is incredibly, if you go have a look at it, it's incredibly insightful. Actually, when you go to Wikileaks and you type in C++, you can filter out all the ones they've had that show you all there's just so much information in there. It's just crazy to think that the information they have in there is somewhat not harmful, because I really think in some ways it is. So we get to this part where I think to myself, what the F was I thinking? Pain, agony, more pain, more agony, insomnia, swearing at myself, swearing at my cat, and more swearing, and then more pain, because I started writing code and all I would ever see was this. That's the only thing that I would see for months and months and months, was this red line, because nothing would compile. Everything was wrong. There was lots and lots of mistakes I was making, and there was so many times that I just wanted to give up and just write it in something that I knew, something that I thought that I could use. But I made a promise to myself that I was going to see this through. So about 7 months down the track, I finally got to this point where the build succeeded. And I was like, wow, it succeeded, but it doesn't work. And I had broken it down into chunks and tried to achieve little bits and pieces at a time. But this was the first time that I actually had what I was thinking was a legitimate implant that hopefully was going to work the way that I've just discussed before. But what I didn't realize was the work was just starting. So the interesting thing is that sometimes you've got to run before you can walk. And I had this implant, and I was now probably a year into this now, maybe a little bit longer. And it was working to a degree, and I thought I'd give it a try. So I wanted to try and, when I was looking at this talk, I wanted to try and express to you, the people listening in the audience, what it felt like. And for me, when I ran it the first time, this is what it felt like.
Heads up display. Check. Forego preferences from home interface. We'll do so. All right. What do you say?
I have indeed been uploaded, sir. We're online and ready.
We start the virtual walk around.
This is how I'm seeing myself in my office with my implant and my C2.
As you wish.
I'm about to install it on one laptop on one job I'm on to see what happens. And this is kind of the feeling that I had, was like I felt like I was, I had engineered something that for me was like the top of Everest, and was it going to work? And I can tell you now, I was so nervous that the first thing was going to happen, I was going to put it on the system and it was going to get caught. But then I was watching this, and I thought, well, you know what? I've got to give it a go. I've done all the testing, all the checking.
3, 2, 1.
So I put it on the system, let it go, and this is how it felt about when it first called home like that. But then something really interesting happened. Once I finished using it, I made some notes, and all of a sudden I felt like this.
Kill power.
Yeah. Operational wise, there've been a few things that had gone good, but also could have been better. It didn't get detected, which was the one thing that I was incredibly worried about. So it didn't get detected. My infrastructure tradecraft though was not up to par to what I had read in the Vault 7 leaks and to what I had read in other places as well. So I needed to figure out a way to do that better. I also needed to take my C2, my command and control, off the internet. I made a decision that I do not want that on the internet because of the data that it collects. I don't want anyone to compromise that C2. And if I'm going to drop an executable, which sounds like you shouldn't do that, but I'm actually dropping executables more and more these days than I am in relation to high value targets instead of staying in memory. Probably because I found a really interesting way to do persistence, which I'm gonna share with everybody at the end. And my persistence worked. I found a persistence that I hadn't seen used before. I wanted to be able to see my terminal output from the implant. I wanted to be able to see what it was doing when it was talking. And I needed to get rid of all PowerShell. So I didn't have a lot of PowerShell in my implant, but what I did have in there needed to go away. And I forgot to add proxy detection in my implant, so I needed to make sure that I put that in as well. Actually, I was very lucky with proxy detection because Microsoft's Casablanca, you just write one line and it does auto proxy detection for you. It's actually really neat, and it's works incredibly well. So then I get to my infrastructure tradecraft. Operational security has to be use SSL, make sure I have SSH keys, and OpenVPN. And you'll see why I want to do that in a minute. And my C2 is going to run locally, no C2 on a server out on the internet. So I decided to run it like this. So I have the attacker laptop with the C2 on it. And then I would have an OpenVPN server in the net out on the internet. And I would VPN into that OpenVPN server. And I would have another box out there that would transfer, or however the implant gets onto the target machine. And then the implant calls back to the OpenVPN server, and all traffic is forwarded down through the VPN tunnel locally down to my C2, which is on my laptop. So the chances of my C2 being compromised is not impossible, but it's also very slim. And it's right there on my encrypted laptop, but not on the internet. And this actually, I tested this and it works really well. I actually make it now so we don't have any C2s on the internet at all. We just have either the VPN boxes or whatever they might be, redirecting that traffic down. So comparing functionality to Assassin, which was one of the main tools in the Vault 7 leaks, the interesting thing is Assassin, they had an implant, did tasking, did communication, it had an operational window. You're able to configure it before you sent it out to the target. It had a service installer. It had a pretty good user interface, and you could generate tasks with it. So I wanted to do that, and I called my C2 Overwatch Offensive. Actually, my oldest son walked into my office when I had Overwatch up on the screen, and he said to me, I hadn't given it a name yet, and he said to me, "Hey Dad," and I went, "Yeah." He goes, "That's a lot of computers," and I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, it's like Overwatch. It's like you're watching everyone, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool name. And he's like, yeah, you should call it that, and that's what I did. So I give him credit for that, not me. So I had an implant. It was tasking. It was doing communication. I had an operational window ideas worked out. Configuration was set. I had an installer that seemed to be working quite well, and I had a user interface which wasn't great. So I needed to work on that, and I could definitely generate tasks. So at the moment, I was feeling pretty good because I felt like I was achieving something, and for me to get to this point where I actually had something that was working, it was really it was a really big goal for me. It was something that I really wanted to achieve. Even though I've been in the industry for 15 odd years, this was something that I wanted to achieve for a very long time, and I'm really glad that I sat down and I worked really hard to try and achieve it. So you remember with the concept of operations we had earlier? So all I've basically done here is just replace the name. So now Overwatch Offensive is an automated implant that provides a simple collection platform on remote computers running the Microsoft Windows operating system, and it goes on. So I've kind of been able to simulate this as best I can. So why did I do this? Well, it's fun. I wanted to definitely increase my own skill set. I wanted to help clients understand why you should test your own security posture against real-world attacks. And I wanted to empower security teams to think like an attacker. And I wanted to show why custom tools can be so devastating to an environment. I also wanted to show not just internal SOCs, but outsourced SOCs as well, that when you're looking for that needle in the haystack, when you're looking for you need to understand that traffic and what someone's computer is doing that it normally doesn't do is really crucial to dig and have a look and see why that's doing that. Not just relying on your antivirus or your endpoint protection to tell you that there's something wrong. We're human. Our brains work in different ways. We need to learn to be able to see those things. So this is Overwatch Offensive. Here I'm logging in. That's the Java Web Token. This is the interface. I'm not a designer, so don't be too harsh on me. I'm going to go across the attacker box now. That's the implant. Just going to run it. Yes, I've just dropped an executable on the box. It's going to call home in a minute. I would usually do this live, but obviously for obvious reasons I can't, so you just have to bear with me in the video. You can see the implant's called home. It gives us a bunch of information like the system date and time. It tells us if it's administrator. We're actually hoping that it's not administrator. For a lot of the environments that I test, if you're an administrator, you watch very carefully. I'm starting to issue tasks to the thing. The first task I did was ask it which operating system it is. And the second task I did was take a screenshot. And then the third task you can see there is actually install the keylogger. So we're going back to the attacker now. I'm just making a quick folder on the desktop there, so when you see the screenshot taken, you can see that it's taken now. Now that log there is telling you when the implant is calling in and retrieving tasks. It's actually set for a minute. What I've actually done is, oh no, not on this one. This is real time, so it's actually going to take a little bit of time to come through. But it gives you an idea of like what I'm kind of after. I definitely wanted to have a dashboard view. I wanted it to be able to, as you can see now, it's the implant's called back now. It's actually retrieving the first task, which is wants to know which operating system it is, and the actual code that I've written for this now actually just finished in the last couple of days. I make all my calls for commands to Windows are all through the Windows API using C++. So I don't run up cmd.exe, I don't run up wmic, I don't touch PowerShell. When I'm testing this in my environment, I actually make sure that I don't make any more child processes that's already there. So I don't generate any child processes at all. Everything is done via C++ into the actual operating system itself. As you can see, it started calling back tasks, starting giving some results now. And what I'm going to do is, once I refresh the dashboard, you'll see that it will populate on the right-hand side the system information. So when you're trying to get system intelligence, that's what will populate on the right on that side. And then obviously you get your screenshots that'll come down as well. Got a place for screenshots. You can also do microphone recording as well. And what I really like is that I can play the microphone recording through the actual dashboard itself. So I have like you'll see it when it comes up, but you actually have a play button and you just push play and there's your sound. The other thing is that I wanted to make it so it was scalable. So I've just added in the section now where you have email, you have it in your calendar. So I'm able to run another task now that will actually allow you to import all their calendar into the Overwatch Offensives calendar, and then the microphone will automatically record those meetings that have been taken that are happening. So it's definitely I think we talked about my digital Everest and all the things that I had to do to put it together. And this is what I've come up with, and this is from the that date that I showed you, that drawing. And I guess it's about being inspirational. I guess I want someone else who's watching this or sitting out there and sees this. I want them to go and chase their dreams and build or do something that they really want to do. And I'm enjoying using this during work and things like that. I'm not sure if this video is still going, but we'll see. So yeah, so that's 2 and a bit years of work, and I'm going to refresh. I think the page is going to refresh now. So it's definitely now. Well, I guess we should probably share about the persistence, because I think that's and I'm not sure if anyone else uses it. As you can see now, you get the results on the you get your system information. It tells you there's the screenshots. You click on the screenshot, it brings up a big view of it in another tab. We're actually issued. It says that it'll actually say in a few minutes that the keylogger has been installed. When I install the keylogger on the environment, it's actually installed a little bit differently to what how other keyloggers are installed. And if you want to know in more depth, you can send me hit me up on the chat, and I'll definitely talk to you about it. The other thing is that I wanted to make it so it was user friendly, so anybody could really kind of use it. So what's actually happening here now, I'm actually just typing in Notepad just to show how the keylogger works. One interesting thing I had when I first ran this on a job, I noticed the person was pushing Control-C, Control-V the whole time, doing a copy and paste, and my keylogger wasn't actually retrieving that. So I was able to change the code up and push out an update, which is kind of fun, and then be able to capture the copy and paste as well, which has actually turned out to be incredibly important. So what I'm doing here now is I'm issuing the task to retrieve the key logs. It'll go in there now and actually retrieve those key logs, and you'll be able to see those. They're actually stored underneath the screenshot. I'll scroll down. What I'm actually doing there now is actually issuing the recorded microphone. So the microphone task, as you can see now down below, these are the keystrokes that were captured, and the Control-C and Control-V with what's being pasted or copied and pasted. So yeah, so that's Overwatch Offensive. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Um, it's kind of weird presenting like this. There's no noise at all, and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning in Australia, so like my whole family's asleep. So it's kind of weird, but it definitely gives you the idea of hopefully you've seen something developed from that drawing all the way to this now is definitely um, has definitely been challenging, but incredibly rewarding at the same time when you have something that something that actually works and is really beneficial to I guess to the clients that we test. So I just want to say thank you very much, and I really appreciate you guys sharing this with me today.
All right. All right. Give those emojis a poke. That was a great talk, Wayne.